NASCAR champion Kyle Busch, his family revealing he died from severe pneumonia that then progressed into sepsis.
There are moments in sports that stop everything. Moments where the noise of competition, the rivalries, the championships, the controversies, all of it goes completely silent, and what remains is just the raw, unfiltered weight of loss. The death of Kyle Busch was one of those moments, and when Dale Earnhardt Jr. finally broke his silence and spoke about what he knew, what he had witnessed, and what the two of them had been quietly building toward, the entire racing world felt it in a way that words can barely capture. This is not a story about statistics, though the statistics are staggering. 2 Cup Series championships, 234 wins across NASCAR's 3 National Series, 69 Truck Series victories, a record so far ahead of the next name on that list that it may genuinely never be broken. This is a story about what happened in the final chapter of a man's life, told through the eyes of someone who, for a long time, was his greatest rival, and who, in the end, was becoming one of his closest friends. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has never been a man who performs grief. Anyone who has followed his career, listened to his podcast, or paid attention to the way he carries himself in public, knows that Jr. speaks from a place of genuine emotion, or he does not speak at all. So when he sat down and put into words what Kyle Busch had meant to him, what their relationship had actually looked like behind the walls of the NASCAR garage, and what the two of them had been planning together just days before Kyle's death, people listened differently than they listened to most tributes. Because this was not a eulogy written by a publicist. This was a man telling the truth about another man, and the truth turned out to be far more complicated, far more human, and ultimately far more heartbreaking than anyone outside their inner circle had ever known. The rivalry between Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Kyle Busch is one of the defining storylines of NASCAR's modern era. It was not the kind of manufactured tension that the sport's PR machine occasionally tries to package and sell. It was real. It was personal. It spanned years, produced genuine on-track incidents, generated endless debate among fans, and created a friction between two men that colored nearly everything they said about each other in public for the better part of a decade. The Richmond incident in 2007, where doors were slammed and tempers reached a boiling point, became one of those moments that NASCAR fans archived in their memories alongside the greatest feuds the sport had ever produced. And when Rick Hendrick made the decision to release Kyle from Hendrick Motorsports at the end of that same season, specifically to make space on the roster for Dale Jr., the professional tension between them became something deeper and more personal than a racing dispute. It became a story about careers, about decisions made by powerful people, and about two men who had very good reasons to hold on to the hard feelings that had built up between them. What Dale revealed changes the entire frame around that history, because according to Jr., it was Kyle who decided to end it, not NASCAR, not a team owner, not a PR strategy. Kyle Busch walked up to Dale Earnhardt Jr., started a conversation, and chose to build something different between them. Dale described it as Kyle initiating a discussion about how each of them managed their respective racing operations. It sounds almost mundanely professional on the surface, a conversation about team management between two former rivals. But anyone who understands the pride and the ego that lives inside a NASCAR champion understands what that kind of first step actually costs. Kyle Busch was not a man who made peace gestures easily. He was a man who competed at a level of intensity that most people in the sport found either electrifying or exhausting, sometimes both simultaneously. For him to be the one to walk through that door first says something profound about where he was in his life and what he valued. Dale said the two of them eventually got to a place where they could sit down together, do media appearances together, and actually laugh about the things they had put each other through over the years. That image alone, Kyle Busch and Dale Earnhardt Jr. laughing together about the battles they had fought, is something that would have seemed almost fictional to fans who watched them go at it during those years of genuine animosity. But it happened, quietly, away from the cameras that had documented so much of their conflict. Two of the most important drivers of their generation found a way to become something that neither of them had probably anticipated when they were slamming doors at Richmond. And then Dale shared the detail that made everything else feel unbearably small. He revealed that he and Kyle had been talking about Kyle driving one of the Junior Motorsports late-model cars at North Wilkesboro Speedway. They had a real plan. Not a vague, someday we should conversation, but an actual scheduled appointment. Kyle was going to come to the Junior Motorsports shop the following Thursday to get fitted for his seat. The meeting had a date. The seat had a purpose. Kyle had already started laughing about what it would mean for his fans and Dale's fans to have to cheer for the same car at the same race. Two fan bases that had spent years defined partly by their mutual disdain for the other driver, suddenly united behind a single number on a track in North Carolina. That meeting was scheduled for May 29th. Kyle Busch died on May 21st. 8 days. 8 days separated. One of the most quietly beautiful endings to a rivalry in the history of American motorsport, from the reality that ended instead. Dale did not editorialize that fact extensively. He did not need to. The arithmetic speaks in a way that requires no commentary. They were 8 days away from a handshake at a shop in Mooresville that would have meant more than most of the trophies either man ever collected.
To understand the full weight of what Dale Earnhardt Jr. revealed, you have to understand the 11 days that preceded Kyle's death, because those 11 days tell a story about a man who was living fully, competing hard, and giving no visible indication that anything was catastrophically wrong, even as something clearly was. On May 10th, during the Cup Series race at Watkins Glen International, Kyle was running well inside the top 10, driving with the kind of focused aggression that had made him one of the most thrilling talents NASCAR had ever seen. And then, with the race still going, he keyed his radio and asked his team to locate a specific physician named Bill Heisel from Ortho, Carolina, requesting medical attention at his motorhome after the race. The broadcast picked it up. The television commentators explained it straightforwardly. Kyle had been dealing with a sinus cold all week. Watkins Glen is a demanding road course with significant elevation and G-force loads, and those conditions can turn sinus pressure into something genuinely debilitating. It was treated as a footnote. Kyle finished 8th, his best result of the entire 2026 Cup season, and the conversation moved on. What matters in retrospect is not that the radio call was alarming. It genuinely was not in isolation. What matters is the identity of the physician Kyle requested. Bill Heisel is not a trackside medic. He is the director of motorsports medicine at Ortho, Carolina, and he has been embedded within the NASCAR garage community for well over a decade. Drivers who ask for Bill Heisel by name know exactly who he is and exactly what kind of medical support they are seeking. Kyle knew. The request was specific and deliberate, and it was made by a man who had been dealing with something in his body that was significant enough to require that level of care, even on a day when his daughter Lennox was back home celebrating her 4th birthday. 5 days after Watkins Glen, Kyle showed up at Dover Motor Speedway for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series event and delivered what would become the final win of his career. He qualified on pole. He led 147 of 200 laps. He swept both stage wins. He crossed the finish line more than 3 seconds ahead of the field and claimed his 69th career Truck Series victory, extending a record that already existed in a category entirely separate from every other driver who has ever competed in that series. Standing in victory lane at Dover, Kyle Busch looked exactly like what he was, the greatest Truck Series driver in the history of the sport. After the race, when a reporter asked him why winning never loses its meaning, Kyle gave an answer that the entire NASCAR world has since returned to again and again. He said that you take whatever you can get because you never know when the last win is going to come, so you cherish every single one of them. He said it with a smile. He said it in the voice of a man who had spent 2.5 difficult years at Richard Childress Racing, grinding through a Cup campaign that had not produced the results his talent deserved, and who was simply happy to be standing in a Truck Series victory lane, doing something he genuinely loved. He said essentially the same thing a second time when a follow-up question circled back to the topic. Twice in the same press availability, 6 days before he died, Kyle Busch told the assembled media to cherish every moment because you genuinely do not know when the last one is coming.
Those words have to be understood in the context in which they were spoken. Kyle was not delivering a veiled message. He was not hinting at anything. He was a competitor, reflecting on the reality that wins had become harder to come by than they once were, and that this particular one felt especially good. Drivers say things like this regularly. It is the occupational philosophy of people who spend their lives chasing finishes. But context is a powerful force, And when you hear those words knowing that the man who spoke them would be gone 6 days later, they take on a dimension that no one present at Dover could have possibly anticipated. The following Saturday, Kyle told reporters at Dover that he still was not feeling entirely right. The cough from the previous week had been more substantial than a typical cold. He acknowledged that he was not fully recovered. Nobody treated it as cause for serious concern. He had just won a race the night before. The culture of NASCAR, the culture that Kyle himself had embodied for his entire career, is one in which you compete through discomfort. You push through illness. You show up and you drive, because that is what the sport demands and what the best drivers give. On Monday, May 18th, Kyle's son Brexton turned 11 years old. Kyle posted photographs on Instagram, a collection of images tracing Brexton's life at racetracks and in victory lanes, the kind of visual biography that a father assembles when he looks at his child and sees not just who the kid is now, but the entire arc of who that child has been and is becoming. The caption he wrote spoke about pride and limitless potential, about Samantha, and him watching Brexton grow into someone extraordinary. That post is still on his Instagram account. It was the last thing he ever published on social media. 3 days before his death, Kyle Busch's final public words were about how proud he was of his son. The following day, Tuesday the 19th, Kyle and Brexton drove to Durham, North Carolina, for the grand opening of an Andretti indoor karting and games facility. Mario Andretti himself was in attendance, and the event drew people from across the motorsport world. Someone who was present at the event later described seeing Kyle and Brexton together at the arcade games, completely absorbed in each other, laughing, present, connected. The witness said the moment looked so private and so genuinely joyful that he did not want to interrupt it. Mario Andretti, who would pull out his phone the very next day at Indianapolis Motor Speedway to show reporters a video of Kyle smiling and shaking his hand at that event, called the news of Kyle's death the shock of his life. He said the image of Kyle grinning in that video was entirely at odds with the reality he was being asked to absorb. That same Tuesday, Kyle sent a text message to NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell. The text asked what O'Donnell thought about implementing an over 40 rule that would allow Kyle to compete in all the Truck Series races the following season. O'Donnell later shared this detail publicly, barely holding himself together, as he described how his organization had actually discussed the idea in an internal meeting on Wednesday while Kyle was collapsing in a facility less than 30 minutes away from where that meeting was taking place. Wednesday, May 20th, Kyle drove to the General Motors Charlotte Technical Center in Concord, North Carolina for simulator work. This was routine. Chevrolet teams use that facility regularly for engineering and race preparation, and Kyle showing up on a Wednesday in May was entirely consistent with his normal weekly schedule. At approximately 5:30 in the evening, someone at the facility called emergency services. The Cabarrus County Sheriff's Office later released the audio of that call. What the caller described was not a cold. The individual was experiencing severe shortness of breath, was producing blood, was coughing up blood, was extremely hot, and believed he was going to lose consciousness. The caller confirmed 3 separate times that the person was still conscious and awake. Kyle was transported to a hospital in the Charlotte area. Thursday morning, May 21st, the family released a statement saying Kyle had experienced a severe illness resulting in hospitalization and would not be competing at Charlotte Motor Speedway that weekend. Richard Childress Racing announced a replacement driver. The number 8 Chevrolet, the team said, would be ready and waiting for Kyle when he recovered. Hours later, that statement became unbearable to read. A joint statement from the Busch family, Richard Childress Racing, and NASCAR confirmed that Kyle Busch had died. The cause given was severe illness. 2 words. No hospital name. No medical condition. No explanation of the trajectory from the bathroom floor in Concord to the finality of a Thursday morning announcement. 2 words for the end of a life that had been lived at full speed, full volume, and full commitment for 41 years. The tributes came from every corner of the sport. Denny Hamlin, his former Joe Gibbs racing teammate and one of his closest friends in the garage, described Kyle As the Kobe Bryant of NASCAR, someone whose level of competitive intensity and pure skill set him apart from everyone else in the building. Brad Keselowski, Jimmy Johnson, William Byron, Bubba Wallace, Rick Hendrick, Joe Gibbs. The names of the people who came forward to speak about what Kyle had meant to them reads like a roll call of NASCAR history. And then there is Kurt Busch, Kyle's older brother. The man who told journalists in 2001 that his younger brother was actually the better driver of the two, a declaration of both humility and pride that is rare among competitors. Kurt's own career ended in 2023, cut short by a concussion sustained in a qualifying crash at Pocono that his brain simply never fully healed from. He was inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in January of 2026, just 4 months before Kyle's death, with Kyle standing right beside him on the red carpet for one of the most meaningful nights of both their lives. Since Kyle died, Kurt has posted nothing. Not on Instagram, not on X. The silence is not a failure of love. It is the sound of a man trying to find language for something that language was not built to carry. Richard Childress Racing announced that the number 8 would be retired indefinitely, with a statement